I never thought the day would come when my own child would treat me like a burden. That's not how mothers imagine their lives turning out, is it? We picture ourselves being loved, respected, maybe even cherished in our old age. But life has a way of handing you truths you don't want to face. My name is Sylvia Grant. I'm 74 years old, and this is my story. Before I begin, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Go ahead and leave a comment, because one thing I've learned through all this is that we need each other's stories to feel less alone. Now, let me take you back. When my husband, Paul, passed away suddenly of a heart attack, Daniel was only 10 years old. I can still see him standing at the funeral in that too big suit, holding my hand so tightly as if I'd disappear next. In that moment, I promised myself I would give him everything. He was my only child, my reason to get out of bed, my purpose. Life was not easy after that. I worked 2 jobs for years, mornings at the elementary school cafeteria and evenings cleaning offices downtown. There were nights I came home with my feet swollen and my hands raw from scrubbing, but the sight of Daniel sleeping peacefully made every ache worth it. I skipped meals so he could have seconds. I mended his clothes until there was hardly any original fabric left. And when he wanted to join the school soccer team, I worked overtime just to afford the uniform and those shiny cleats he wore with pride. I remember one Christmas. Money was so tight that I could barely afford a tree. I decorated our little living room with handmade ornaments, scraps of ribbon, old buttons, anything I could find. Daniel unwrapped the second-hand bicycle I had worked months to save for, and his eyes lit up brighter than any Christmas lights. That memory fueled me through many years of sacrifice. As Daniel grew older, I tried to instill in him the values Paul and I had always believed in: kindness, humility, and gratitude. But something shifted when he went off to college. I noticed the calls became less frequent, the visits home shorter. When he did come back, he seemed different. He'd roll his eyes when I talked about the past, or he'd make comments about how I didn't understand how the world works now. Still, I told myself it was just youth. Every generation looks at the one before them as outdated. I kept sending him care packages, homemade cookies, knitted scarves, little envelopes of money when I had some to spare. And when he graduated, I cried tears of pride, not realizing those same tears masked the first cracks in our bond. Daniel landed a corporate job soon after and moved into a sleek apartment with his girlfriend, Melissa. I helped them whenever I could, even co-signing a loan once because he said it would help him build credit. Looking back, that should have been my first real warning sign. But at the time, all I saw was my boy trying to create a life for himself. The distance between us grew wider, and so did his expectations. He'd ask me for money for emergencies, yet I'd see photos on social media of him and Melissa at trendy restaurants, taking weekend trips, smiling with cocktails in their hands. It stung, but I brushed it off. I convinced myself that's what parents do. They give, even when it hurts. What I didn't see then, what I refused to see, was how his gratitude had faded into entitlement. When I hinted once about how I was struggling to keep up with the bills on the old house, Daniel waved it off. "Mum, it's just money. You'll be fine," he said, his eyes glued to his phone. It was a casual comment, but it cut deeper than he realized, because it wasn't just money. It was my survival, my dignity, my independence. Melissa wasn't much better. She always wore a smile, but it felt practiced, like a mask. She'd say things like, "Oh, Mrs. Grant, you shouldn't be climbing stairs at your age," or "It must be hard to keep up a whole house all by yourself." Harmless on the surface, but laced with suggestion. The suggestion that maybe I didn't belong in my own home anymore. Still, I clung to hope. Hope that my son would remember the woman who sat up with him all night when he had the flu, who sold her wedding ring to pay for his textbooks, who worked herself to the bone so he could stand tall in the world. I told myself that deep down, Daniel loved me as fiercely as I loved him. But as I would come to learn, love can wither when greed takes root, and the day would come when that greed would reveal itself in the cruelest way possible. It started with small things, the kind of moments you almost talk yourself out of noticing. Daniel would make offhand remarks about how expensive it was to maintain the house. He'd frown at the old paint on the porch, or shake his head when he saw me bent over in the garden. One afternoon, while I was serving him his favorite apple pie, he leaned back in his chair and said, "Mum, this house is too big for you. Don't you think it's time to let it go?" I laughed nervously, brushing it off. "This house is where you grew up, Daniel. Every corner has a memory. I'm not ready to let go of that yet." Melissa, ever the picture of politeness, added in with a syrupy smile, "We're just worried about you, Sylvia. It must be so hard taking care of this place at your age." The way she said your age made me feel like an old appliance on the verge of breaking down. At first I convinced myself their concern was genuine. They were busy with their lives after all, and maybe they just wanted to ease my burden. But then Daniel started talking about options. He mentioned assisted living facilities, how modern and comfortable they were, how I'd have people to talk to and not have to worry about bills. I stared at him, fork frozen halfway to my mouth. "Are you suggesting I move out of my own home?" He shrugged, not even meeting my eyes. "It's just something to think about. You'd be safer there. And honestly, it's a smart financial decision." Those words, smart financial decision, lodged themselves in my mind like a thorn. Whose financial decision was he really worried about? Mine or his? The real turning point came when he asked me to sign some papers. "It's just for convenience, Mom," he explained smoothly, sliding the documents across the table. "Tax purposes. It'll protect the house, and it makes everything easier if anything happens to you." I hesitated. Legal papers were never my strong suit, and my hands trembled a little as I flipped through the pages. "Daniel, I don't understand all of this." He smiled, the way he used to when he was a boy trying to get me to buy him candy at the grocery store. "You don't need to, Mum. Just trust me. I'd never let anything bad happen to you." Those words, "trust me," were the same ones I'd clung to my whole life. I had raised this boy, loved him, sacrificed for him. So, against the quiet alarm bells ringing in the back of my mind, I signed. Weeks passed, and the house no longer felt like mine. Melissa began dropping little comments, almost like hints of a plan she wasn't supposed to share. "You know, Daniel and I have been talking about renovating. It would be so nice to update the kitchen, maybe open up the floor plan. Young couples love that." Young couples, not you, not your family. It was as if they were already imagining their lives here without me. I remember one Sunday when Daniel came over, walking through the rooms like a buyer at an open house. He ran his fingers over the banister, peered into the spare bedroom, even commented on how much potential the basement had. I felt a chill run through me as I followed him. This wasn't my son reminiscing about his childhood home. This was a man sizing up property he believed belonged to him. It was subtle, but I could feel my place shrinking. The living room, once filled with family photos, now seemed to be a place Daniel criticized for being too cluttered. The kitchen, where I had baked hundreds of pies, suddenly needed an upgrade. Even the garden I tended with so much love was too much work. Still, I clung to hope. I told myself he was just being practical, that he wanted to help me in his own way. But deep down, something darker whispered, "He doesn't see this as your home anymore. He sees it as his investment." One evening, as Melissa was pouring herself a glass of wine in my kitchen, she looked at me over the rim of her glass and said, almost too casually, "You know, Sylvia, you'd have so much more freedom if you didn't have to worry about this place. Imagine You could live somewhere where everything is done for you. I looked her square in the eyes and replied softly, "This house is my freedom." She laughed, a little too lightly, and changed the subject. But her words lingered in the air long after they left that night. I began to feel like a guest in my own home. Every creak of the floorboards, every photo on the wall, felt like it was slipping away from me, and though I couldn't prove it yet, I knew in my heart that something terrible was coming. What I didn't realize was that I had already signed away more than I understood, and when the betrayal came, it would hit me like a blow I could never have prepared for. It happened on a Tuesday morning, one of those days that begins so ordinary you never imagine it'll split your life into before and after. Daniel called me and said, "Mum, let's go for a drive. You've been cooped up too much. Fresh air will do you good." I remember smiling as I slipped on my cardigan, grateful that he wanted to spend time with me. I thought maybe we were finally turning a corner, that my son was remembering I was more than just a responsibility. But as we drove, the scenery felt wrong. Instead of heading toward the park or the old diner we sometimes visited, he turned down a long road lined with buildings I didn't recognize. My heart gave a little thump when I saw the sign, Rosewood Assisted Living. "Daniel?" I said, my voice uneasy. "Why are we here?" He kept his eyes on the road. "Just checking out some options. No pressure. You'll like it, Mum. It's modern, clean, and you'll have people to talk to." My stomach sank. Options for what? He pulled into the parking lot, put the car in park, and finally looked at me. His smile was calm, rehearsed. "For you, Mum. It's time. You can't keep living alone in that house. It's not safe. Melissa and I think this is best." I felt the air leave my lungs. Best for whom? Inside, a cheerful young woman greeted us. "Welcome, Mrs. Grant. We've prepared a room for you." A room. My feet froze to the ground. "What do you mean, a room?" I didn't agree to this. Daniel put his hand on my arm, firm but not cruel. "Mum, please, don't make this harder than it needs to be." I wanted to scream, to demand he take me home. But then I saw it. A small suitcase sitting by the desk in the lobby. My suitcase. The one from my closet. My hands began to shake. You moved my things?" His voice was low, defensive. "Melissa and I thought it would make the transition easier. You'll be comfortable here, Mum. It's temporary, just until we figure things out." But I knew better. Temporary was a word people used when they didn't want to face the finality of what they were doing. The room they showed me was small. A single bed pressed against the wall, a narrow window overlooking a parking lot. It smelled faintly of bleach and loneliness, the kind of place people forgot each other in. That first night, I sat on the bed, staring at the walls, numb. The silence pressed on me, thicker than I'd ever known. My home, my garden, my kitchen, my chair by the window was gone. And my son, the boy I had sacrificed everything for, had left me here as if I were an old piece of furniture taking up too much space. A few days later, I learned the real reason. One of the nurses, kind enough to chat while checking my vitals, asked if I'd seen Daniel's vacation photos. I frowned, not understanding. She pulled out her phone, scrolling through social media, and there it was. Daniel and Melissa, smiling in sunglasses, tropical drinks in hand, standing on a beach in Hawaii. Caption: "Living our best life. Finally, some peace and quiet." Peace and quiet. The words felt like knives. Their peace was my abandonment. Worse, I noticed something in the background of one of their photos. The porch of my house, draped with string lights. They had thrown a party. In my home. The house I scrubbed, repaired, and bled for. The home that carried the weight of decades of memories. They stood on that porch as though it had always been theirs. That night, I couldn't sleep. The hum of the hallway lights, the muffled cough of another resident down the hall, the faint sound of a television someone had left on too loud. All of it felt like a cage. I lay there and thought of every sacrifice I had made, every skipped meal, every overtime shift, every holiday where I gave Daniel the best gift and settled for nothing myself. And now, here I was, eating bland food off plastic trays, while my son sipped cocktails on the beach. The betrayal cracked something inside me. It wasn't just about being put in a nursing home. It was about being erased, pushed aside so he could enjoy the life I had given him. I remember whispering into the dark, my voice shaking but steady enough for me to hear the truth in it. If he thinks this is the end of my story, he's wrong. He doesn't know who he's dealing with. Because what Daniel forgot was this. I was the woman who had built a life out of ashes once before. And if I could do it then, I could do it now. What he thought was my ending was about to become my beginning. The days at Rosewood blurred together, marked by the clatter of food trays and the shuffle of tired footsteps in the hallways. Some of the residents seemed resigned to this life, sitting quietly in the lounge with blank stares or eyes fixed on the television. But I wasn't resigned. I was angry, a kind of anger that settled deep in my bones, stronger than any ache of age. Each night, as I lay in that narrow bed, I replayed my life in fragments. The time I worked 3 weeks straight, without a day off just to pay for Daniel's school trip. The time I sold the last of my jewelry to cover his tuition deposit. The endless nights I stayed awake while he studied, bringing him tea, telling him he was destined for more. And this was how it ended, with him tossing me aside like I was an obstacle in the path of his comfort. I knew then I had two choices: accept this quiet burial of my dignity, or fight. And I had never been one to lay down easily. The first step came from a woman named Joan, a retired nurse who had been at Rosewood for a few months. We struck up a friendship over breakfast, her voice sharp with wit that cut through the gloom. One morning, she leaned across the table and said, "You don't belong here, Sylvia. I can see it in your eyes. You're not done yet." Her words lit something in me. "No," I said quietly. "I'm not." I confided in her about what Daniel had done, how he convinced me to sign the papers, how my house no longer felt like mine. Joan shook her head. "That's elder exploitation, plain and simple. He can't just take your rights like that." That word, exploitation, rang in my ears. I hadn't thought of it that way. I'd thought of it as betrayal, cruelty, greed. But exploitation, that made it legal, tangible, something I could fight. Joan introduced me to her niece, who worked as a paralegal for a small firm downtown. With trembling hands, I dialed the number she scribbled on a napkin. That call changed everything. The lawyer, Mr. Whitaker, listened patiently as I explained. He asked for copies of the documents Daniel had me sign. I didn't have them. Of course I didn't. But I remembered enough details for him to recognize what had happened. "If he pressured you into signing without proper explanation, and if we can show he benefited at your expense, we have a case," he said firmly. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope. Mr. Whitaker arranged to meet me in person at Rosewood. I'll never forget the look on his face when he saw the small room they'd placed me in. "Mrs. Grant," he said, his jaw tight, "we're going to fix this." Over the next few weeks, we quietly gathered evidence. Whitaker discovered Daniel had used my funds, my retirement savings, to pay for part of that Hawaiian vacation. He also uncovered Melissa's plans to refinance the house once I was settled into permanent care. Every revelation made my blood boil, but it also strengthened my resolve. This wasn't just about getting my house back. This was about reclaiming my dignity. One evening, alone in my room, I pulled out an old photograph of Daniel as a little boy, his gap-toothed smile, his arm wrapped around my shoulders. I pressed the photo to my chest and whispered, "I loved you too much to see this coming, but you'll never take from me again." From that moment, I decided I wouldn't just let Whitaker fight this battle for me. I would be present. I would be strong. We filed motions quietly while Daniel was still on vacation, blissfully unaware of what was brewing back home. Whitaker advised me to stay calm, to act as though nothing had changed. Let him think he's won, he said. When he comes back, we'll have the papers ready. So I waited. I played the part of the quiet resident, reading in the lounge, smiling politely at the nurses. But inside, I was building armor. I began keeping a journal, writing down every memory, every sacrifice, every detail of what Daniel had done. It was part therapy, part testimony, a reminder to myself that my life was worth more than the way he had treated me. By the time Whitaker returned with the first court order, temporary reversal of property control, I felt steadier than I had in months. He placed the papers in my hands, his eyes steady. "You're going home, Mrs. Grant." The words made my knees weak. Home. My home. That night, as the staff wheeled my suitcase to the front desk, I glanced once more at the sterile hallways of Rosewood. I wasn't leaving as the broken woman Daniel left here. I was leaving as a mother who had learned to fight again. And I swore to myself, when Daniel returned from his paradise, he would find a storm waiting at his doorstep. The morning I stepped back into my house, the air smelled different. It wasn't the faint bleach of Rosewood or the cold emptiness of that small room. It was home, a mix of lavender from the garden and the old wooden floors that had held decades of footsteps. I stood in the doorway for a long time, breathing it in. For a moment, I almost forgot that my son had tried to take this away from me. Almost. Whitaker had arranged everything perfectly. The court had recognized elder exploitation in Daniel's actions. The transfer of the deed was frozen pending review, and I was restored as the primary resident of my own home. Legally, Daniel could not contest it until the hearing, and Whitaker was confident the evidence would bury him. Still, I knew I had to move carefully. If Daniel thought I was panicking, he'd strike harder. So I stayed quiet. I didn't call him. I didn't text him. I let him enjoy his Hawaiian sunsets, his cocktails, his illusion that I was tucked away like an old coat in a storage closet. Meanwhile, Whitaker and I built our case. Every paper trail led to another betrayal. Withdrawals from my savings, charges on my credit card for things I had never bought, emails where Melissa inquired about selling the property quickly. They had been planning this for months. The more I learned, the more I realized. This wasn't just greed. This was calculated. They had looked at me, the woman who had given them everything, and decided I was disposable. One evening, I sat at the kitchen table with my journal open, Whitaker's files spread out in front of me. My hands trembled not with fear, but with resolve. I wasn't just going to win this case. I was going to make sure Daniel understood exactly what it meant to underestimate me. I started small. I called the utilities company and restored all accounts to my name. I contacted the bank and flagged every suspicious transaction. Whitaker guided me through freezing certain accounts Daniel had been dipping into. Piece by piece, I took back control of my life. And then, almost with a sense of dark humor, I left everything else untouched. The porch lights Daniel strung up for his parties? Still there. The half-empty bottle of wine Melissa left on the counter? Still there. The note on the fridge about renovation plans? I kept it exactly where it was, because when they came home, I wanted them to walk into a house that looked familiar, until they saw me sitting there. Every day, I grew stronger. Joan from Rosewood called to check in, cheering me on. "You're doing what half of us only dream of, Sylvia," she said. Her words fueled me. I wasn't just fighting for myself. I was fighting for every elder who had been treated like a burden, every parent whose sacrifices had been forgotten. The week before Daniel's return, Whitaker came by with a stack of documents. He laid them on the table and tapped the top page. This, he said, is the final nail. The court order confirms you as the sole deed holder again. Daniel has no legal claim, and we've filed an abuse report. When he comes back, he'll have a lot more than you to answer to. I nodded, tears stinging my eyes. It wasn't just victory, it was vindication. But still, I wanted one more thing. Closure, a confrontation. He had left me without looking back, without a second thought. I wanted to see his face when he realized he hadn't beaten me, so I planned it, carefully. I didn't tell him I'd left Rosewood. I didn't tell him I was home. I let him think his plan had worked. The day before their flight landed, I cleaned the house top to bottom, not out of duty, but out of ownership. Every corner sparkled, every photo frame straightened. And then I set the legal documents neatly on the coffee table, ready for him to see. That night, as I sat by the window with a cup of tea, I felt a calm I hadn't felt in months. Not fear, not sadness, just strength. Because I knew, when Daniel opened that door, expecting to step into his house, he would find me waiting, and I would be the one holding the deed, the proof, and the power. He had sent me to a nursing home so he could sip rum on a beach. But when he returned, suntanned and smiling, I would be there to wipe that smile off his face. The day Daniel and Melissa returned was bright and warm, the kind of summer day when the neighborhood kids rode their bikes up and down the street, and the air smelled faintly of cut grass. I stood at the window, watching the taxi pull up, my heart beating steady but strong. This was it. The car door opened, and out they came. Daniel first, tan, relaxed, with that lazy swagger of someone who had spent 2 weeks in paradise. Melissa followed, wearing oversized sunglasses and dragging 2 enormous suitcases. They looked like a picture from a travel magazine, everything polished and smug. As they walked up the path, Daniel glanced at the house, smiling like a man admiring his property. My stomach turned, but I stood tall. The door swung open, and there I was, sitting calmly, in the armchair by the window, a cup of tea in my hand, papers stacked neatly on the coffee table in front of me. For a moment, he froze. His smile faltered. "Mum?" he stammered. "What are you... how?" Melissa stepped inside behind him, her brow furrowing. "Wait, what's going on?" I thought. I set my cup down with deliberate calm. "You thought wrong." Silence. The kind that presses down heavy and makes every sound in the room sharp. The creak of the door closing, the hum of the fridge, the rustle of Melissa's silk scarf. Daniel cleared his throat, trying to recover his composure. "Mum, I thought you were at Rosewood. What are you doing here?" I leaned forward slightly, letting him see the strength in my eyes. "I live here, Daniel. This is my home. It always has been." Melissa's mouth tightened. "That's not possible. The deed—" I cut her off, my voice firm. "The deed is mine again. Every shady trick, every lie, every paper you had me sign. Undone. Elder exploitation doesn't sit well with the courts, as it turns out." I watched the color drain from Daniel's face. He looked from me to the stack of papers, then back again. His voice cracked. You got a lawyer?" "Yes," I said evenly. "While you were sipping cocktails on a beach I'll never see, I was sitting in a room the size of a closet, eating cold food off plastic trays. And do you know what I realized, Daniel? I realized I wasn't done fighting. Not for my dignity, not for my home, and certainly not against you." Melissa tried to laugh, a thin sound that didn't reach her eyes. "This is ridiculous. We were only trying to help." "Help?" My voice sharpened. "Was it help when you moved my things without asking? When you signed me into a nursing home like I was luggage you didn't want to carry? Was it help when you used my savings for your vacation?" Daniel shifted uncomfortably, his face pale beneath the tan. "Mum, listen, we didn't mean—" "Stop," I said, raising my hand. Don't lie to me anymore. You wanted me out of the way. You wanted this house, the money, the freedom. You saw me not as your mother, but as an obstacle. Well, obstacle removed. Not me, Daniel. You. At that cue, Whitaker, who had been waiting quietly in the kitchen doorway, stepped forward. His presence was like a thunderclap in the room. He carried a folder under his arm, his expression stern. Mr. Grant, Mrs. Grant. He addressed them coldly. I'm here as Mrs. Sylvia Grant's legal counsel. As of this morning, the court recognizes her as the sole owner of this property. You have no claim here. Additionally, there are pending reports of financial exploitation and elder abuse. I suggest you take this matter seriously. Daniel's mouth opened, then closed again. His voice was almost a whisper. You went to the police? Whitaker didn't flinch. The appropriate authorities, yes. Melissa's sunglasses slipped down her nose as her face flushed. She grabbed Daniel's arm. We should go. But I wasn't finished. I stood, my legs steady beneath me, and looked my son in the eye. Daniel, this house sheltered you when you had nothing. These walls heard your laughter, your tears, your dreams. I gave you every piece of myself so you could build a life. And this is how you repaid me. He looked away, shame flickering across his face. I stepped closer, my voice quiet but firm. This house protects me now. From you. And you will never again have the power to take from me what I've earned. Melissa muttered something under her breath, pulling him toward the door. For a moment, Daniel lingered, his shoulders hunched, his face unreadable. Then, without a word, he followed her out. As the door closed, I exhaled deeply. The silence was different this time. Not heavy, not suffocating. It was peace. Whitaker gave me a small nod. You did well, Mrs. Grant. I looked around my living room, my photographs, my furniture, my life, and I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Power. For the first time in years, I wasn't just surviving. I was standing. When the door shut behind Daniel and Melissa, I felt the weight of decades lift off my chest. For the first time in weeks, I sat in my own living room without fear, without doubt, just peace. The papers Whitaker left behind sat neatly on the coffee table, legal proof of what I already knew in my heart. I had taken back my home, and with it, my dignity. That night, I walked through every room, touching the walls, straightening the photos, whispering to the house itself, "We're safe again." In the garden, I ran my fingers across the lavender bushes I had planted years ago, their scent reminding me that life, no matter how bruised, could bloom again. I thought of Daniel, of the boy he once was, the boy who used to run barefoot through the yard, the boy who cried into my chest when his father died. That boy was gone. In his place was a man who had forgotten the meaning of sacrifice, who saw only money where there should have been love. And yet, I wasn't bitter. I was resolute. Because if this experience taught me anything, it's that age does not mean weakness. We are not burdens. We are not obstacles. We are people with history, with rights, with voices that deserve to be heard. I looked into the camera in my living room, the same way I look at you now, and I said softly, "Don't ever let anyone make you feel small, not even your own children. If you've lived through loss, hardship, and sacrifice, then you've already proven your strength. Don't forget it." Daniel left me in a nursing home so he could live his dream in Hawaii, but when he came back, I was the one holding the power. I took back the deed, I took back my life, and I took back me, and I will never give that up again.